everybody. It is January 1st, 1976, and I am Walter Cronkite Jr., the most trusted man in America. So let's dive into the causes of this Vietnam War that really shook up the world. So the causes of the Vietnam War really can be traced back to the end of World War II. First, let's flash back to what was going on in Vietnam during the war. So Indochina was a French colony occupied by the Japanese during the war, but a Vietnamese nationalist movement formed called the Viet Minh in 1941, led by Ho Chi Minh. And with this movement, they waged a guerrilla war against Japan. America supported this. And then at the end of the war, Japanese gave nominal independence to Vietnam, which basically meant Vietnam didn't know what they were doing. And then the Viet Minh basically took over the government. You know, things got spicy. So after that, things went downhill. Thanks, Indochina War. First Indochina War. So basically, the Allied powers thought that Vietnam should be controlled by the French. Why? I don't know. The French lacked the troops, the resources to go in. America had to really help them with supplies. So then, the nationalist Chinas swooped in when French was like all weak and stuff, and took northern Vietnam, and the British occupied the south to help out the French. Basically, this kind of created a division between the two, and the war continued for years, escalated in 1949, and by the end of the war, which was settled by the Geneva Accords of 1954, the 17th parallel was created, making a literal division between the non-communists in the south and the Viet Minh control in the north, which were commies. You know it.
Welcome back from the break. I'm Walter Cronkite. As we transition into our next point, I'd like to talk about the changes for Vietnam and how Vietnam stayed maybe just a little bit the same. So one of the biggest changes to Vietnam was the death and destruction. The U.S. military used more than 14 million tons of explosives and millions of gallons of defoliants, which ruined fertile land and crops, and Vietnam lost the majority of its richest forests and lands. Nearly 4 million Vietnamese were killed, either wounded during battle, and this included approximately 1.3 million civilian deaths. Destruction of South Vietnam led to poverty and homelessness for many, and many of these people fled to local cities to find work and or make money through illegal activities. However, the U.S. did drop 1 million tons of bombs on the North in hopes to inhibit the North from sending supplies or aiding the South in any ways. Peasant men were recruited for the army, and so were women, and the rest were left behind to tend the fields. So the agricultural industry in Vietnam really sunk, and so did all of the rest of the industries. Citizens were required to wear camouflage. The capital of Saigon was unified under communist rule on April 30th in 1975, and re-education camps and new economic zones were instituted. One thing that did not change for Vietnam, however, civilians were still fleeing to other regions before and after the war, and U.S. policy was continuously pulling troops out of Vietnam, and the fear against communism still existed in Vietnam.
Welcome back from the break. I'm Walter Cronkite, and to close us out, we're going to talk about the significance and the consequences of the Vietnam War in terms of the Cold War. First of all, the most obvious point is the staggering death toll. As I earlier said, millions of civilians died, almost 2 million Vietnamese civilians, while 1.1 North Vietnamese troops died, and 200,000 South Vietnamese troops suffered casualties. On top of that, our own country, the U.S., suffered from a loss of 58,000 troops. And 12 million Vietnamese became refugees, which reinforces the point that there was a big displacement issue in the country before and after the war. The U.S. bombing of North and South Vietnam left the country completely in ruin, and the use of herbicides like Agent Orange hurt the environment and also caused long-lasting health problems. This year, Vietnam is talking about reuniting under the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, but in our own country, there's a large distrust of the military right now, as many people have protested against the U.S. reason for involvement in the war and whether or not it was an okay decision. Veterans are having a hard time readjusting to life after such a brutal war and lasting trauma overseas, and tens of thousands were wounded in combat if they didn't die. It seems like a complete loss for the U.S. because much of Indochina became communist, but if we think about it, it wasn't much more of a win for North Vietnam because fighting and conflict is continuing even now. It proved to be a different kind of war than we had fought in before. It wasn't like World War I or II where there was a clear winner-takes-all kind of mindset. But North Vietnam had much more straightforward objectives than we did, which does contribute to the distrust and protests going on right now. This war is known as a proxy war and the ongoing Cold War that we don't really see an end to sight to, and that's the way it is, January 1st, 1976.